Hello and welcome to The View from 22. I'm Ben Lazarus, the Spectator's Special Projects Editor. With 300,000 Israeli troops amassing near the Gaza border and the possibility of a ground invasion looming, Mark Regev, Benjamin Netanyahu's senior advisor, joins me today to discuss the next steps. Firstly, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today on what I appreciate has been a very difficult and very busy week for you. Just to start, a senior Hamas figure said on Wednesday that this operation took 2 years in the making. How did Israeli intelligence manage to miss it and get it so wrong?
So it's clear that there was a mishap or mistake. Something went wrong. Something went, unfortunately, terribly, terribly wrong. And the cost in human life is massive. And for Israelis, this is particularly annoying because we pride ourselves on having excellent intelligence services. And we pride ourselves on being very good at collecting information on what our enemies are up to. And so from our point of view, this is unsatisfactory. And I'm sure when the fighting is over, there will be investigations, inquiries, lessons learned to find out why is it. I don't know if it was 2 years they were working on it, but even if it was just weeks, why is it that they surprised us the way they did?
Now, there's been much talk this week about the potential for a ground invasion. And obviously there's about 300,000 troops sort of amassing near the Gaza border. Could Hamas be defeated without launching a ground invasion and purely by airstrikes?
So I'm not at liberty to talk about tactics and what and when and how we're going to attack Hamas. I could only share with you the goals. And the goal is to crush Hamas and to create a new situation in Gaza whereby Israelis are no longer threatened the way they have been. And the goal is to have a situation where there aren't terrorists in Gaza with either the desire or the capability to hit Israel the way Israel was hit on Saturday morning.
Is there any way of achieving that goal and that objective without causing mass civilian casualties on the Palestinian side?
Well, obviously we don't target Palestinian civilians. At the same time, we know that in every armed conflict in recent history has involved civilians being caught up in crossfire. And though you don't want to see civilian casualties, that cannot be a reason not to defend yourself. I mean, we didn't want this war. Hamas started this war. But we will finish it, and we'll finish it on our terms. There's no point in some sort of quick fix Band-Aid solution, and then when we're just back to square one and Hamas will attack us next month or in 2 months or in half a year. No. We want to come out of this with a new reality in Gaza, and that will require a very, very serious military operation. And that is necessary. And that's what the people of Israel demand. Now, about your question, though, I want to say something. There was a war against Slobodan Milosevic over Kosovo, where Britain took the lead. And it was a war to protect innocent people. It was a war to take on a dictator. The war was just. But do you know how many innocent civilians were killed in that war? There has never been a war without innocent civilians being caught up. And to hold Israel to a standard that no one else is held to, I think there's something wrong with that. We have the right to defend ourselves.
Now tell me, Mark, if Hamas is wiped out of the Gaza Strip, what's to say that wouldn't only be a short-term fix and that later on down the line there would be an equally militant jihadi type group that would just simply replace it? The sort of military phrase of mowing the lawn, but the lawn will grow back. Is that not a fear down the line?
So we're looking at it, in your question, we're looking at it through the concept of what we've been through over the last decade, more than a decade. Hamas has been in power for 16 years now. And we've had, ever since Hamas came to power, these intermittent, every couple of years, we've had what we've called an operation in Gaza because they were shooting rockets in Israel and we had to defend ourselves. I want to stress what we're going through now is not another Gaza operation by the IDF. This is war. This is full-scale war. What they did to us on Saturday morning was an escalation of massive proportions. And Israel is refusing to go back to square one. We're going to come out of this, as I said, with a new reality in Gaza, a different reality. Hamas will be crushed.
And away from Gaza for a second, how concerned are you by Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, that's actually another reason why we have to be so forceful and decisively defeat Hamas, because others are watching. Now, Israel has many friends in the Middle East. You know about that. We've got relationships with Egypt and Jordan and with Morocco and with the Gulf states, and there's been talk of late of a breakthrough with Saudi Arabia. But there remain enemies of Israel in the Middle East, and Hezbollah is one of them. And they're watching. And if Israel isn't strong in our response, I'm afraid that the lesson learned is that you hit Israel with impunity or relative impunity. It's crucial that Hamas pays a massive price for its attack upon us. That's a lesson that will be learned by Hezbollah, and that'll also be a lesson that the Iranians will know. You hit Israel, you kill our people, you will pay a price. That's an important lesson.
Do you expect Hezbollah to launch an offensive against Israel? I mean, obviously there's been sort of skirmishes on the border in the last couple of days, but do you think anything might escalate there?
I think, unfortunately, it's possible. We don't want it. But Hamas and Hezbollah are in many ways twins. Yes, they're sister organizations. Radical terrorists who are in the Iranian orbit, who've been funded and armed and supported by Iran. And it's clear that there's a solidarity between these extremist organizations. And they share the same radical ideology that Israel has no right to exist, not in any borders. Yes, Israel shouldn't be there, full stop. And they're both terrorist organizations who believe in killing innocent people. And so Hezbollah could try to escalate the situation. And so my message is clear. If we were caught by surprise by Hamas on Saturday morning, we're not going to be caught by surprise from the north. We're ready. We're prepared. We don't want a war in the north. But if they force one upon us, as I said, we are ready and we will win decisively in the north too. We've unfortunately had to plan in Israel for a two-front war, one in the north and one in the south at the same time. We don't want it, as I've said. But if we have to fight it, we will, and we will prevail.
You've mentioned Iran several times, and there's been conflicting reports about the extent to which Iran was involved in the events of last weekend. The Israeli government have said Iran were involved. US officials have denied that Iran was involved. To what extent do you think Iran was involved in the planning and execution of those attacks?
What is public information? We know that Iran and Hezbollah both work very closely with Iran, specifically through the Revolutionary Guards. Some over 90%, 95%, if I'm not mistaken, of Hamas's budget comes from the Iranians. They have over the years given them military training, they've given them weapons, they've given them lots and lots of money, they've given them other sorts of support. And they share the same radical extreme theology/ideology. And so they're together and they coordinate closely and they meet often. Do they support the sort of operation that we saw against Israel on Saturday morning? The answer is unequivocally less, because if in London and in Washington, in Paris and Berlin, the operation, the Hamas attack was condemned, it was welcomed in Tehran. They were applauded. Did the Iranians give the order for it to happen on a specific day the way it happened? I'm not sure that we've got evidence of that. But I can say this, there's no doubt the Iranians support and encourage that sort of operation.
Is there an argument to be made that if Iran is behind so much of what's going on with Hamas and Hezbollah, that there might be a case for cutting the head off the snake directly and launching an attack on Iran?
Well, if you used a snake metaphor, allow me to use an octopus metaphor. That Israel is fighting the tentacles, but the head is in Tehran. And there is a strategic logic in saying, well, you're fighting the tentacles, but you can't really win the war unless you deal with the head.
So is that a suggestion that a direct attack on Iran is not out of the question?
It's a suggestion that we understand the strategic situation in which we live, nothing more.
And let's say there was a strike on Iran. Is there not a huge danger that the sheer amount of rockets that are pointing towards Israel from the Lebanon border would all suddenly go off, and it would become a very serious existential risk to the very survival of Israel?
Well, as I said a moment ago, we're not interested in an escalation. I said that. And I say that because I know it to be true. And here I think the Americans have played a very important role by moving their fleet, their aircraft carrier, task force to the Eastern Mediterranean. They've sent a message that others should not try to take advantage of the fighting in Gaza. And that's an important message. And I hope people in Tehran and the Hezbollah leadership are paying attention.
And do you believe that Qatar holds any responsibility for these attacks? Obviously, they shelter the Hamas leadership.
I think it's a problem that they shelter the Hamas leadership. Let's be frank. This is an organization that we saw what they committed, the crimes that they committed against humanity, against my people, violence that is ISIS-type violence. And yet the Hamas leadership sits in Qatar like kings, yes, hosted by the Qatari government. It's unacceptable. And I think there has to be sanctions against countries that harbor these people. If you harbored Al-Qaeda, the famous thing after the attacks of September 11th is either you're with us or against us. If you harbored Al-Qaeda, you faced Western animosity. I think it should be the same with harboring Hamas. The sort of violence we saw in southern Israel was ISIS-type violence. In today's press conference, both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Secretary of State Blinken talked about the comparisons between ISIS and Hamas. And so I think any country that is hosting Hamas officials, there has to be consequences.
So would you like to see the UK government enact sanctions on Qataris here? I mean, we have a lot of Qatari money swishing around London. The Qataris are likely to buy Manchester United Football Club soon. Do you see this as all part, presumably they're buying Manchester United to do a sort of sports washing of their image. Would you like to see the UK do more to counter the influence of Qatar here?
I think any country that is hosting official representatives of an organization that conducted the sort of violence that we saw, horrific violence that we saw on Saturday morning, there deserve to be consequences.
Just to talk about the violence that took place on the weekend. On Wednesday, there was a lot of confusion about the attack on the Kfar Azar kibbutz, if I'm saying that correctly. And there was a story, of course, about the beheading of children and babies. Now, it seems to take a long time for an official spokesperson to come out and say whether that story was correct or not, which sort of allowed a confusion to sow online. Why was the official announcement so slow?
I think there's always confusion and there's always the rumor mill, and people talk about what they heard and not what they actually know. I know for a fact that there were examples of beheadings. I have seen pictures of burnt bodies. I've seen pictures of burnt bodies of babies, but I can't say more than that. I think in all these sort of horrific situations, people see different things, people see different stories. I can only tell you what I know to be true, and I have just said so.
Do you know how many children and babies may have died in that massacre?
I know quite a number. I can't give you an exact number. We know the overall figure is 1,200, and the overwhelming majority of them were innocent civilians. And we've seen the pictures of the elderly who were taken back to Gaza as kidnapped people, as hostages. We've seen the children taken back to Gaza as hostages. We know of stories where children were shot in front of their parents and parents were shot in front of their children. I mean, really is ISIS-type violence. Not normal people don't behead others.
Now, regarding the hostages, does Israel have any idea under what conditions they're being held in and where they might be being held within the Gaza Strip?
So the working assumption is that Hamas has separated them and put them in a number of places for their own reasons. But I want to say two messages on the hostages. Number one, and let me be clear, Israel is watching closely. And any person, Hamas or other, that abuses a hostage, we are watching, we are following it closely, we will find them, we will punish them. They will not have immunity. And if it takes 5 years, 10 years, or 25 years, they will face Israel's wrath. And the second thing I wanted to say is what they've done in taking these hostages is against all norms of accepted international behavior. And the clear demand of the entire international community has to be these people must be released immediately and unconditionally. That should be the demand of the international community. Everything else is unacceptable.
And what would you say to the relatives and families of people who have been taken hostage? I mean, is there much hope for them?
We will do everything that is humanly possible to help bring their loved ones home.
But presumably there would be no negotiations for this. This is purely on a military basis.
I cannot go beyond what I've said.
And what do you make of President Biden's response to what's taken place this week?
The Israelis have been more than happy and grateful for the support we've received from Washington and from the UK, for that matter. Your Foreign Secretary was here yesterday. Today we had the American Secretary of State here. Unequivocal condemnation of what Hamas has done. Clear differentiation. Here is a democratic country defending itself against a hostile attack. There's no moral equivalency between Israel and Hamas. That is appreciated. And the Americans have done one better by moving their forces to the region, by moving that carrier to the Eastern Med, and by resupplying Israel's armaments.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for your time, Mark. I do really appreciate it, and all the best.
My pleasure. Thank you.